Have you ever heard of a woman who danced in diamonds by day and smuggled war secrets by night, whose voice could silence a theater and rattle a dictator, who faced down racism, fascism, and poverty not with bitterness, but with a brilliance the world still hasn't forgotten? This isn't just the story of a performer. This is the story of Josephine Baker, a woman born into nothing who became everything, and whose true story is far more complicated, powerful, and haunting than history ever taught us. In this episode, we're not just tracing her footsteps across jazz clubs and battlefields. We're stepping inside the mind of a woman who refused to be silent, no matter the cost. This is not a fairy tale. This is a reckoning. Welcome to True Crime Echoes. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The curtain falls, and the spotlight returns. They say when a performer dies, the stage remembers. It was April 12th, 1975. Paris. Josephine Baker, one of the most dazzling stars of the 20th century, was sitting quietly in her room, flipping through newspapers. For once, the headlines weren't about war or scandal or political unrest. No, they were about her comeback. Her show at the Bobino Theater just days before had sold out every seat. The critics called it breathtaking. Audiences wept. She had performed 34 songs with the same fire, the same passion, as if she were still 25. And then, just like that, she collapsed. A brain hemorrhage. By the time they got her to the hospital, it was too late. Josephine Baker was gone. She was 68 years old. But here's the thing that stuck with me. She died with glowing reviews in her hands. Think about that for a second. After everything she had lived through, she died being loved, being celebrated, being... That's not something many women like her, black, defiant, political, get to experience. And maybe that's why I can't stop thinking about her. You see, most people remember Josephine as the woman in the banana skirt, the exotic dancer, the cabaret queen of Paris, the entertainer. But what if I told you she was also a spy, a war hero, a civil rights activist, a woman who used her body and her fame not for fame itself, but as a weapon against fascism, against racism, against injustice? Her story is wild, messy, beautiful, tragic, and deeply, deeply inspiring. And I think the world deserves to hear it, not just the glamour, but the fight, the pain, the sacrifice, the part that doesn't get written into the songs or sewn into the sequins. So that's what I want to do today. Tell you her story, but not from the beginning. Not yet. Because Josephine's story isn't a straight line, it's a circle of rebirths. And for me, it doesn't start with her birth in the slums of St. Louis. It starts here, with her death. With this quiet, lonely morning in Paris where a legend turned the last page of her life, while the world finally remembered who she really was. Let me take you back. Before the spotlights, before the banana skirt, before Paris and politics and performances, back to where it all started on the dirt roads of Missouri, back to the little black girl who refused to disappear. Because that's the real story of Josephine Baker. Chapter 2. Born into Fire. When people talk about icons, they rarely mention where they came from. Not really. Not the dirt, not the silence, not the ache of being unseen. I was born as Frida Josephine McDonald in St. Louis, Missouri in 1906. And if I'm being honest, I don't think the world ever expected anything from me. I was a poor black girl in a segregated America, born to a single mother who scrubbed floors for a living. My father, a man who vanished before I ever had a chance to memorize his face. My earliest memories are not of laughter or lullabies. They're of hunger, cold, the sound of grown-ups arguing behind closed doors, and the feeling that no matter how small I made myself, I was always somehow in the way. By the time I was 8 years old, I was working. Not helping out, working, scrubbing, polishing, running errands. I learned quickly that people didn't see children like me as children. They saw us as tools, as labor, as something to order around and then forget. And when I made mistakes, when I dropped a plate, or when I spoke too loudly, or when I dared to look someone in the eye, I was beaten. The kind of beatings that make your bones remember, that teach your body to flinch long after the hand is gone. But the pain wasn't just physical, it was everywhere. in the looks, in the rules, in the way doors closed in my face before I even reached them, in the way white families smiled at me while making sure I never sat at their table. Racism wasn't an idea. It was the air I breathed. It was the water I drank. It was knowing that no matter how hard my mother worked, no matter how good I would never be seen as enough. And yet, even in that ugliness, there was something wild in me, something untamed. I didn't know how to name it back then. I just knew that when I danced, when I moved, people stopped and stared. Not in the way they stared at a maid or a poor child, but in the way they looked at someone who mattered. So I leaned into it. I danced on street corners with the other neighborhood kids. I made silly faces, I played pretend, and for a few stolen minutes at a time, I could forget. I could become something bigger than a hungry girl in hand-me-down shoes. But joy, when you're poor and black in America, is dangerous. People don't like it when you laugh too loud or shine too brightly. They want you small, obedient, silent. I wasn't. I got kicked out of school for being disruptive. At home, I was punished for being too much, too expressive, too alive. But I couldn't help it. I wanted more. More than scraps, more than invisibility, more than what St. Louis told me I was worth. And by the time I was 11, I knew no one was coming to save me. If I wanted to live differently, I would have to break the rules written for girls like me. So I started running, not away from home, but away from what home had become a cage built from fear and survival. I joined a street performance troupe, vaudeville. It wasn't safe, it wasn't stable, and it definitely wasn't what a respectable girl was supposed to do. But for the first time, I felt something close to freedom. There were nights I slept on the floor, days I went without eating. But I didn't care. Because on that stage, even a dusty makeshift one, I was no longer just Frida. I was movement, rhythm, fire. And deep down, I think I knew. This was only the beginning. They may have tried to silence me in St. Louis, but I had already heard the music, and once you hear it, truly hear it, you don't go back. You dance forward, always forward. Chapter 3. The city that loved me and didn't know me. When I arrived in Paris in 1925, I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been that far from home. I didn't speak the language. I didn't have a plan. All I had was a suitcase, a few worn-out costumes, and the fire in my bones that told me this was my chance. And Paris. Paris welcomed me like I was already somebody. It was overwhelming, honestly. After a lifetime of being invisible in my own country, suddenly I was being stopped on the street. People asked for autographs. Artists wanted to paint me. Designers begged me to wear their gowns. And on stage, God, the stage. I danced in feathers and pearls and barely anything at all, and the crowds roared. They didn't just clap, they screamed, they cried, they worshipped me. But here's what most people don't understand. Yes, Paris made me famous. Yes, I was adored. But that love came with conditions, because the truth is, they didn't love me, not really. They loved what I represented. Something exotic, something wild, something foreign they could marvel at, like a painting or a jungle cat behind glass. They loved the idea of a black woman who smiled, who danced, who entertained, but who never challenged them. And I played along at first. I was 20 years old, poor, hungry. I had never seen that kind of attention before. I thought, maybe this is what freedom feels like. But late at night, after the music faded and the lights went down, I couldn't help but wonder, am I free or just being caged with gold instead of bars? They called me the Black Venus, the Creole goddess. They dressed me up in bananas and beads, draped my body in animal prints, and said I was the future of entertainment. But in reality, I was still being defined by the same thing I always had been, the color of my skin. Only now, instead of being rejected for it, I was being consumed. It was complicated, because I was proud. Proud to be the first black woman to star in a major motion picture. Proud to be the highest paid performer in Europe. Proud that little black girls from America could look at me and think, maybe I can shine too. But I also knew I was walking a tightrope. If I smiled too much, I was harmless. If I spoke out, I was ungrateful. If I demanded more, I was difficult. And so I learned to dance with my eyes open. I learned to give the crowd what they wanted, while holding on to who I was behind the curtain. And behind that curtain, I was watching, listening, paying attention to the world crumbling around me. Because while people were throwing roses at my feet in Paris, the drums of war were getting louder. The 1930s were creeping in. The Nazis were rising. And I started seeing headlines that reminded me Europe wasn't immune to hate. I knew what it looked like. I had seen it before in the streets of St. Louis, in the eyes of white shopkeepers, in the police who didn't need a reason to strike. Hate had a smell, a sound, a rhythm, and I could hear it again. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to just be a performer. I wasn't going to spend my life entertaining people who didn't see the full picture. If they were going to look at me, then I was going to show them something real. Because I had learned something in those Parisian theaters, something I had never truly believed before. My body wasn't just a tool for survival. It was a weapon, a message, a stage of its own. And I was done playing safe. Chapter 4. Silk Dresses and Secret Codes. I used to think the stage was the most dangerous place I could be. Spotlight's judgment, the pressure to perform those things, could crush a person if they weren't careful. But nothing compared to what I was about to do. By the time the 1940s arrived, Europe was on edge. Hitler's voice was everywhere, on the radio, in the papers, echoing in the minds of people who should have known better. And I had a choice. I could keep dancing. I could keep smiling, wearing my feathers and jewels, pretending that what was happening outside the theaters wasn't real. Pretending that fascism, anti-Semitism, racism, they were someone else's problem. Or I could do something about it. And the truth is, I had already seen what silence could do, so when the French resistance came knocking, I didn't hesitate. They didn't come to me because I had a gun. They came to me because I had access. I had influence. I could travel across borders without raising suspicion. Who would question the glamorous American star after all? Who would search me, Josephine Baker, while I carried classified information sewn into my sheet music, written in invisible ink, or hidden in the lining of my dress? They thought I was harmless, and I used that, my chateau in the south of France. Les Milans became more than just a home. It became a shelter for refugees, a meeting point. A place where documents were passed hand to hand, hidden behind curtains and under floorboards. I would perform for Nazi officers at night, shaking hands with men whose uniforms reeked of cruelty, smiling like nothing was wrong while knowing I had just smuggled secrets under their noses. It was terrifying, not just because I could be caught, but because every time I looked into the eyes of those men, I saw how easy it was for evil to dress itself up in power, in discipline, in control. And yet, I never felt more alive. For the first time, I wasn't just a symbol. I wasn't decoration. I was action. I was useful. I wasn't just dancing for applause. I was dancing for freedom. Still, the war wasn't glamorous. It broke me down in ways no critic ever could. I got sick, really sick. Tuberculosis. I nearly died. At one point, I was bedridden for over a year, and yet even in that fragile state, I refused to stop. From my hospital bed, I kept writing, kept sending messages, kept planning. Because I knew something most people didn't. You don't need a weapon to fight a war. Sometimes all it takes is a woman who refuses to be silent. Looking back, I know I could have chosen safety. I could have stayed in the limelight, pretended it wasn't my fight. But how could I? How could I stand on a stage begging for love when the world was choking on hate? That's the part they never taught in school, that the woman in the banana skirt once risked her life, not for applause, but for a country that still saw her as an outsider. France would later award me the Croix de Guerre and the Legion of Honor. And I was proud, yes, but the truth, those medals weren't why I did it. I did it because I knew what it felt like to be powerless, to be a child with empty hands and a hungry stomach forgotten by the world. And if I could stop even one person from ever feeling that way again, then the danger, the secrecy, the lies, it was all worth it. Chapter 5. A different kind of war. The war ended, but the fight didn't. I had risked my life for France. Lied, smuggled, performed, bled. I had stood in smoke-filled back rooms with spies and freedom fighters. I had walked through cities in ruins, carrying hope in my suitcase and fear in my chest. And when it was all over, when the Nazis were defeated and the streets flooded with celebration, I thought, finally I could rest. Finally, the world would change. Finally, I could just live. But I was wrong. Because when I returned to America, the country of my birth, the country I had left behind it hadn't changed at all. I was still black. And in America, that still meant second class. I remember walking into a hotel in New York. I was a star by then, a war hero, decorated, dignified. I had performed for kings and queens, but the receptionist didn't see any of that. He just saw my skin and told me they were fully booked. I knew they weren't. That was the moment it hit me. I had risked everything for freedom overseas, but I couldn't even order a cup of coffee in my own country without being degraded. And that kind of pain, it seeps into you, not just because it hurts, but because it contradicts everything you believed. I had thought fame would protect me. That service would earn me respect. But racism, it doesn't care who you are, doesn't care about your medals or your passport or your stage presence. It just reduces you. And that's when I realized this was another war. Not with guns and spies, but with laws and stares and silence. With systems that told black people they were lucky just to survive. So I found another way to fight. I adopted 12 children from all over the world. Korea, Japan, Colombia, Algeria, Finland, Venezuela. Different colors, languages, faiths. I called them my rainbow tribe. It sounds idealistic, I know. And maybe it was. But at the time, it felt like the only way I could show the world what peace might actually look like. What equality could feel like. 12 children, one roof, no discrimination. It wasn't perfect. God, no. There were challenges I didn't anticipate, cultural clashes, emotional wounds. I didn't know how to heal the pressure of raising a family under a microscope. And, truthfully, sometimes I tried too hard to control their stories to prove a point through their lives. But I loved them, and I needed them. Because after everything I'd seen, bombs, betrayals, applause, I still didn't know what family really felt like. I wanted to build something no one could take away from me. Les Melandes became our home, a kind of utopia. Tourists would come and watch us as if we were some exhibit, the perfect international family. But I didn't care. Let them stare. Let them see what unity could look like. Of course, behind the scenes, money was tight. The estate was expensive. The shows weren't paying what they used to. Fame had faded, and the headlines had moved on. And I was still fighting, still trying to hold everything together with sequins and willpower. Sometimes I ask myself if I was trying to save the world, or just trying to save myself. Maybe both. Because even when the curtain closes, even when the lights dim, the performer in me never really leaves the stage. Not entirely. There's always one more act, one more message, one more way to use my voice because silence has never suited me. And if I was going to go down, I'd go down fighting. Not just for a country, not just for a cause, but for love, for dignity, for something that lasts longer than applause. Chapter 6. When the Lights Went Out. It's a strange thing falling from grace. You think you're prepared for it? You tell yourself fame is fleeting, money comes and goes, the spotlight isn't forever. But when it actually happens, when the applause fades and the world stops watching, it feels like suffocating in silence. For years, Les Melandes had been my everything, my sanctuary, my stage, my dream of what the world could be. I poured every cent I had into it, every ounce of hope. I wasn't just raising children, I was raising a message, a legacy. But messages don't pay the bills. By the late 1960s, the money was gone. The shows weren't selling out anymore. My debts had stacked so high I couldn't even see over them. And the banks, well, they didn't care that I had marched with Martin Luther King, or that I had entertained troops during the war, or that my face had once lit up billboards from Paris to New York. They wanted payment, not history. One day I woke up and Les Melendez wasn't mine anymore. They took it, my home, my children's home, my dream. They sold it off piece by piece while tourists snapped photos and I stood there watching the walls come down around me. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. Not because I lost a house, I'd lost things before, but because I had believed truly, believed that if you gave everything to the world might give a little something back. I was wrong, and for the first time in a long time, I broke. I couldn't work, couldn't sing, couldn't dance. I was too tired, too angry, too empty. I disappeared from the public eye for a while, hid away, let the rumors swirl, let people assume I was finished. But here's the thing about me, I never stayed down for long. Even in that darkness, there was still a spark, still a voice in my head whispering, "Not yet, not like this." Friends came to my aid, people I didn't even know cared. Princess Grace of Monaco, for one. She offered me an apartment in Roquebrune, a lifeline, a reminder that dignity doesn't die just because the spotlight dims. And slowly, I began to rebuild. Not the chateau, that was gone, but something deeper, something more personal. Myself. In 1975, at the age of 68, I stepped onto the stage again. Not as a novelty, not as a relic, but as a woman who had lived, who had survived. I poured everything into that performance, my joy, my rage, my pain, my love. The crowd stood, they cried, they remembered, and for a brief, shining moment, I felt whole again. Not because they loved me, but because I loved me, all of me. The girl from St. Louis, the chorus dancer in feathers, the spy, the mother, the fighter, the woman who had lost everything and still chose to rise. That's the part people don't always see in stories like mine. They think the arc ends with glory or with tragedy, but sometimes the most powerful ending is a quiet return, one last bow, one final truth. I wasn't here to be remembered as a star. I wanted to be remembered as someone who refused to be erased. Chapter 7, Echoes That Never Fade. People always want to know how the story ends. They ask me, were you happy? Did it all work out? Was it worth it? And I never really know how to answer that, because life isn't a perfect arc. It doesn't wrap up with a neat little bow. It's messy, unfinished, full of contradictions. But I'll say this: on April 8th, 1975, I stood on stage in Paris one last time. It was my comeback, my tribute show, my curtain call, all rolled into one. And I gave it everything I had. They say the crowd that night was electric, full of stars, royalty, old friends, strangers, people who had grown up with my music, people who only knew the legend, people who remembered the girl who once danced in nothing but bananas and the woman who smuggled secrets across enemy lines. I sang like my life depended on it. Maybe in some way it did. And then, 4 days later, I slipped into a coma. I never woke up. Some say it was exhaustion. Others say it was poetic. The final breath of a life lived at full volume. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was finally still. They gave me a military funeral in France, 21-gun salute, a hero's farewell. The first black woman to be buried at the Pantheon in Paris, my name etched into history alongside philosophers and presidents. But I wonder, if I hadn't risked my life as a spy, would they have honored me? If I had just been a dancer, would they have remembered me? That's the thing about being a black woman in this world. You don't get legacy without sacrifice. You don't get applause without pain. But I never wanted to be famous just for the sake of it. I wanted to mean something. I wanted little girls, black girls, brown girls, poor girls, to see someone like them on a stage in the history books and the headlines, and know that they were possible, that they mattered, not because the world gave them permission, but because they took up space anyway. Today, people say my name with reverence, with awe, and sometimes with confusion, because I wasn't just one thing, I was many: a performer, a mother, a lover, a fighter, a rebel, a survivor. I was never quiet, never simple, never easy to contain. And maybe that's the point. Maybe legacy isn't about being perfect. Maybe it's about living so fully, so defiantly, that the world has no choice but to remember you, not for what you represented, but for who you chose to be. So if you're listening to this now, if you're wondering what any of this has to do with you, just know every time you speak truth to power, every time you love out loud, every time you refuse to be silent, you carry me with you. My story didn't end with my death. It echoes, still, always. Chapter 8, If I Could Speak to You Now. If I could speak to you now, just you and me, no cameras, no crowd, I'd tell you something I've never said out loud. I didn't always know who I was. Not really. For most of my life, I was becoming someone. The entertainer, the symbol, the savior, the story. I was always chasing something, acceptance, justice, maybe even love. And in that chase, I wore 1,000 masks, changed accents, switched roles, reinvented myself so often I sometimes forgot who I started out as. Was I the little girl scrubbing floors in St. Louis, dreaming of Paris? Was I the spy in silk gloves, slipping secrets between the notes of a song? Was I the mother desperate to build a world my children wouldn't have to escape from? I was all of them, and none of them. I was Josephine Baker, a name I chose, a name I built. And maybe that's the lesson. No one teaches you identity isn't always given. Sometimes you have to create it. Sometimes you have to take everything they told you to be and become something else entirely. I didn't want to be a victim, even when I had every reason to be. I didn't want to be tragic, even when I lost everything. I wanted to be undeniable, because I had seen too much. I had seen what hate could do, what silence could steal, what power could destroy, and I decided if I couldn't change the world by shouting, I'd change it by standing, by showing up, by refusing to be invisible. There's this thing people say that history repeats itself. But I don't believe that. I think history waits. It waits for someone to speak up to break the cycle, to say no, not again. That's what I tried to do in my own way. And now it's your turn. You don't have to be a star or a spy or wear feathers or fight wars, but you do have to live with your eyes open. You have to pay attention. You have to use your voice even when it shakes. Especially when it shakes, because someone somewhere is watching you. Just like I once watched the world from the back alleys of a segregated street, wondering if there was a place for me. Be that place, for someone else, for yourself. And if you ever doubt that one voice can matter, that one person can push history, even an inch in a better direction, remember me. Remember the woman who started with nothing but a dream and a body that refused to sit still, and still found a way to be heard. Josephine Baker's story doesn't fit neatly into categories. She was never just an entertainer, never only a mother, a fighter, or a survivor. She was all of it at once. And that's what makes her legacy so rare and so necessary. In a world that tried to silence her, she chose to sing louder. In systems built to erase her, she carved out a place anyway. And even now, decades after her final performance, her story echoes through music, through resistance, through every soul who's ever dared to be more than what the world expected. Thank you for joining us on this journey through her life. If her story moved, you stay with us. There are more voices like hers, hidden, powerful, waiting to be heard. This has been True Crime Echoes, where forgotten stories find their voice again. Until next time, stay curious, stay awake, and never stop asking what the truth is trying to tell you.